Hi, I'm Adam, and welcome to Sunflower Woodworking. All right, so this project, if you've followed our channel for any amount of time, you will know that a while back, we'll roll some footage over here somewhere. A while back, one of the first longer videos I made was around making an MPT MFT table, a multifunction table, and making that tabletop for my Bora Centipede legs. So I have a very small shop. Um, and I often have to break things down and put them away. Everything here is designed to be moved or broken down and put away, including my working tables. And I have two of them. They're about 4 feet by 4 feet. Um, we'll put the calculation into metric down here. Um, but essentially, what those tables do is I got a tabletop. It kind of folds in half. It's made out of 3/4 inch Baltic birch, and it goes on top of the Bora Centipede legs. And then I use some pipe freeze fittings that have a rubber gasket and a bushing on it that actually allow me to fasten the table to the top of the Bora Centipede. So it sits flush or sits below the fasteners sit below the surface. I'll show you that in a second. But the other video I made was making one of the tabletops so that I could use it as a router table as well, with a router table insert with a lift, so that way I could use that. The other table, they both have T-tracks, they both have dog holes, but the other table also has the feature built into it to also be my router sled table. So I'm going to show you in this video how I built that. And the reason I'm making this video is because I have to rebuild a piece of that. So the router sled itself that sits on top of the rails that goes back and forth and left and right, where the router sits itself, it was the first generation and it was just too small. Couple of things are wrong with it. It's too small. The vacuum port was not in the right spot. And then I have a shroud that goes around the bottom to kind of help contain the wood chips. Because I'm in a small shop, in a garage shop, and that connects directly into the house, I don't want to be tracking, creating a lot of dust in the air and tracking chips everywhere. So the shroud helps keep that in a little bit of control. But it was too stiff. So a lot of other little things I'll show you in just a second, but it wasn't the best generation one. So we're going to rebuild that piece of it. But show you very quick and easy. Now, there are a lot of great router sleds out there. There are ones that guys will show you. There's all kinds of videos on YouTube making it just out of some plywood, a piece of wood, using metal T-rails or L-rails, using steel track. I mean, all kinds of things. Or even just, like I said, with wood and then putting wheels on it. But then you can also buy some that are already made that a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit better smooth action and better motion. But they start at around, I think the cheapest one I saw was $199, and they go up to the hundreds, if not thousands. So wide range. The one I built, I built this probably about 2 years ago. So with inflation, it's probably going to cost about 20%, maybe more than it did. But I used Viver tracks and rails, and everything included, T-nuts, rails, the acrylic, the half-inch thick acrylic, everything you're going to see cost me less than $200, and I felt like I got a much higher quality product out of it. But I'll show you. Let me show you what all this is, and let's dive right in. So here's the table as it is today. If you want to see how I did the T-track on here, the sister table is over there with the hole for the router table insert. And I showed, I think in that video, how I did the T-track inserts. So you can see on one half, it's got the T-track. The other half, it's got the dog holes. Very, 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 very useful table setup. And then I got some clamps underneath that allow me to join the two halves of the table so I get a 4x8 table to make bigger things. like a boat, which you look at my library, there's a video on making a boat. So, but what we've got here are sets of screw holes. So basically what I did was I set the rails, got my distances and everything down the way I wanted them based on the size of the rails I bought. Then I drilled the hole, I marked the holes based on the rail, and I'll show you that in a second. And then on the other side, I recessed and put some T-nuts into those holes, and then put some CA glue to kind of help hold them down. The glue on the T-nuts wasn't absolutely necessary because they do have teeth, which will then hold into the plywood, but a little bit over engineering. I don't want them to fall out. I don't want from just constantly being tightened and loosened, tightened and loosened. So put a little bit of CA glue in there to kind of help it. All right, so here's the whole rig. Now we're going to talk more. Actually, most of the video is going to be about the sled. So we're not going to talk much about that at this moment. But these are the actual rails. And the rails came with these runners. Let me try and get this over. It's a little heavy. Came with these runners. As you see, I just put a block of laminated ply here to raise this up, so I had some clearance. But those came with these rails. And then these seats, or these guides here, came with these rails. So you can see there are two different types of rails. Like I said, I'll try to put that in the description so you can see the actual parts I bought. But then the rails, these rails here, you'll notice they are proud of the edge of the table. If I wanted to spend the money, I probably would go even longer, because what this allows it to do is it helps me maximize the amount of space I can use on the table overall, right? So if I know I'm gonna have a big piece, it allows me to bring the sled and run it to about here, which means it puts the router bit probably about here. So I don't get the full 4 feet across, but I do get pretty close to the edge, right? And then we've got the cotter pins here in the end, which is kind of like a stop. It just prevents the guides from the sled actually going past this point. A lot of things I could have done for that, but I wanted to keep this revisable. I wasn't originally going to put just drill a hole and put a pin through the end, but I want to keep it so that if I ever decide to extend it to the other table and put more rail over there and bring the two tables together, I've got that option. I won't mess up the actual rail. That, and it's stainless steel, so it's or maybe it's aluminum. I'm not sure what it is. I'll have to look that up. But don't want to do any damage to the rail, so I just use these cotter pins to keep it from going off the edge. And then, as you can see, the holes here line up with the holes on the table, and that's where the T-nuts are. And I just use a number 6-32 screw with a bugle head to fasten those on. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to fasten these rails back on, and then we'll put the sled on. So now we got it on. Took a few seconds, good, but you got to line this up nice and straight on both ends when you get that first set of guides onto the rail. But once you get that first set of guides on, the second set pop right on, and as you can see, moves pretty freely across, and then laterally moves pretty freely across as well. One comment that I get a lot is, well, from folks who have seen it, is like, well, don't you get a lot of flex as you're moving across the rail? It's like, well, you're really not pushing down on the router. The router is just riding on this, and it only weighs a few pounds. So even if I put a lot of pressure on this, I'm not getting very much flex on this at all. So never been a concern, and I've never really had a problem with getting any kind of cupping towards the middle of anything I'm trying to flatten. But looking closely, as I said, the router bit sits in the center, of course, right there. Hole big enough to fit the slab flattening bits, but we're probably about 3 inches off the edge of the table, and then with the bit underneath, probably about 2 inches from the edge of the bit that I typically use which has some replaceable carbide blades on it. So get pretty far, but the vast majority of the stuff that I use this table for isn't very big. It's cookies, which once we get this all set up, we're going to take a couple of those cookies off the stack over there, set them on the table, and we're going to get to some milling on that. But honestly, this is done everything. There's only one time where I needed something bigger, and what I did was I put the piece on here, did the milling as far as I could, then had to pick it up, flip it around, do the other side, and it worked very well. So I wasn't too worried about it because I just pulled, like I said, I pulled the other table up against it, and there are brackets here. So I do have some latches that clamp on to this and pull the two pieces of the table together, and they're absolutely flush and level. So bringing those two tables together, you can see it all the way down there. You can see the clamp on the other side. I don't know why this is turned around backwards. But bringing those two aside keeps it very, very flat, very level. So I didn't have any problems flipping that big piece around. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this piece apart. Unfortunately, I'm going to leave the rails all put together. I'm just going to take these screws out here to take the rails off the riser blocks. Now these riser blocks are on here because these will mount onto these guides down here, but I wanted more height because I wanted be able to fit some thicker stock. Plus I wanted a wood block on here because if I need it to be higher, I can add more wood blocks, just throw a couple screws in it. Bada bing, bada boom, Bob's your uncle. I can raise this up. There haven't been some people that have given me ideas on how to revise those riser blocks, make them adjustable. I might do that on this project, don't know yet. But right now I'm just trying to get this thing, get a little bit bigger router platform built with using some 3/4 inch polyacrylic, get the better shroud on it, redo my dust collection so that I can get on several projects that have been waiting for this with those cookies. So I may not fuss with that too much this time. I might just slap another couple pieces of ply on top of that just to rise it up and then work from there. But so first things first, let's get this thing taken apart and get ready to make the next piece. All right, so let's see what we got. So this is the bottom of the base. This is where the router gets mounted here. This is the dust port, and this is the old dust port, which was smaller and ineffective. When I made the new dust port, it was still not big enough, right? So it goes from a 2.5 inch port down to probably about a 1.5 inch port. Still not enough. Now, granted, I am running my dust collection off of a 6.5 horse Craftsman shop vac. It does have a high CFM or cubic feet per minute capacity, and which is why I bought this particular model. And it's hooked to a dust deputy, which definitely helps with airflow and collection. But on this here, I do get a good amount of airflow, and it does a great job on my bandsaw and on all of my other equipment. For the most part, I mean, it's not a central vac system, but someday maybe. But definitely taking it down to a smaller port was not the right answer, especially when you start getting higher on your slabs that you're flattening. Because the higher this platform goes, the more airspace there is underneath the router bit, more room for things to kind of fall into around where you're working, and harder for that hose and that vac to draw enough air from the lower parts to bring that up. But I never planned on the dust collection to be a complete dust collection. I really wanted it just to pick up the fine dust and as much as it could so it wasn't as messy, which of course is why I had this shroud going all the way around it to kind of help keep that stuff contained, right? And then the way I did these holes, now the holes are very important when you cut it, when you drill it onto the acrylic. The alignment is so crucial. Now, when I drilled these holes, I drilled them a little bit bigger than I needed. And if I look at the screws, It's got a pan head on it, so it's a little bit wider. I mean, obviously wider than the hole, but it gives me about a 1/16 of an inch of play. So I made the drill, I screwed the holes, or drilled the holes about a 1/16 of an inch, maybe a 32nd of an inch bigger than I needed for the screw. And that gave me a little bit of wiggle room. So after I put the sled together for the first time and try to move things across it, it started off fine in the middle, but then it got a little bit tight because it was a little skewed. And if I didn't leave that play in these holes, I wouldn't have been able to adjust that. So because I left the holes a little bit bigger, I was able to loosen a couple of the screws just a little bit, adjust it, check my tracking, and then as soon as I got it fine-tuned, I tightened the screws down for the final tightening, and it slid, as you saw a few minutes ago, it slid perfectly across the platform. Now, the other problem I had was I didn't think when I drilled the dust port. I drilled it at the back of the bit's motion. So basically the bit is moving, let me turn this right side up. When it's mounted, the front of the router is this way, the back is this way, and I wanted the dust port in the back. Problem is, it's taking the chips off in the front initially, right? Because I'm moving into the slab, or I'm using the front of the router bit as I move across the slab. So what happens is it's shearing off the chips up here and then just getting blown around in here from the force of from the centrifugal force of the bit. So the dust wasn't really getting back here. So I need to move that dust port to the front, in the front of the router bit. And as I've seen on videos since I made this, just about every professional company that makes them, I think that's where they put the dust port. I'm going to double check that and do a little bit of testing first, but I'm going to want to put that dust port up here in the front. And not bring it down. I got a new adapter for the hose that's actually going to leave it at 2.5 inches, increase the airflow in this chamber so that I can pick up more dust, especially when, I don't know if you can see it, some of those slabs over there are about 3.5, 4 inches thick. So I am going to have to bring this up and rise it a bit. And again, it's going to leave more airflow, more airspace for the chips to go. So if I can bring more of that air up into this port, great. It just reduces the amount of mess later on. Right, so I'm not going to throw this away. Number one, I'm going to use this for a template. Number two, 1/2 inch acrylic is not cheap. As if you're going to build this, you will see. It's not hugely expensive, but it's also not cheap. So I definitely don't want to throw it away, primarily because I'm going to use it as my template for the new piece. Secondarily, I'm sure at some point in time, I'm going to find that I need a small chunk of acrylic, and I don't want to sacrifice a whole sheet because I buy it in 2 foot by 1 foot sheets. It's a little bit, it's kind of price balancing there. And also in terms of storage, because I buy like 5 or 6 sheets and then just store them. So I don't want to waste a whole piece of a sheet because I do use this for bandsaw boxes and for other things. So whenever I need a small chunk, I've got this piece here I can cut up, no problem. Right. So let me get my next piece and then we'll clamp it down and start doing some drilling. So we got our old platform set up on a new piece of acrylic. And you can see we got all the screw holes here from the old one on top of the new slab of acrylic. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put on a 1/4 inch drill bit and drill out the existing holes. Now we're going to move things around just a little bit because I want to shift the base here a little bit that way to allow more room for this new 2.5 inch adapter. So I want to bring those screw holes a little bit closer to the edge this way. Not too close because I don't want to get any cracking when I screw it down, but I'm going to have to move it out just a little bit. And we are going to make this hole a little bit bigger because I do have a slab flattening bit that I bought that I'm quite happy with. It's very big. It's about 3 inches, and this hole isn't big enough for that. And I'll explain more about that later on. So I am going to want to move the whole thing over a little bit. So I'm going to do some quick measurements, move this in, and then take that 1/4 inch drill bit and drill out these holes. Now, one of the tricks to keep in mind when drilling on acrylic or plastic or epoxy or anything else is that as you drill, just like with drilling anything, the bit is going to heat up. And what happens with acrylic and plastics and other things like that is that as it heats up, it starts to melt the debris that you're drilling out. So be very mindful of that, because what happens when that starts to heat up is that it'll start to catch and it'll seize your bit, and sometimes it'll even cause chipping, cracking, or breaking in the acrylic that you're drilling. Even at half inch, it can definitely chip, but you might actually get some cracks depending on how fast you're drilling and how much torque there is. So definitely take time to do the drilling. Let the bit cool as often as you can, but let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we got the holes drilled and did a little trial fit and make sure our screws are lining up. I only put one screw in each corner. Everything seems to be lining up okay. We'll know for sure here in a few minutes when I try to get all the screws in and make sure everything lines up. But anyway, before we move on with the drilling, I wanted to get a fit for the base that I'll be using for the router on this sled, and then make sure that we've got enough space and clearance for that um, adapter here for the vacuum hose. And I checked everything out before we started drilling, of course, but double checking now again. Now, what I discovered too is, looking at the old base and template, a lot of different things going on here, a lot of different ports, a lot of different things I tried. They worked out okay, but never really the way I wanted it to. So, with this base, I've got to take the handles off to use it, because I didn't want to use a bigger piece of acrylic and expand the whole sled here. I want to keep it nice and tight. So I got to take the handles off this base. But honestly, when I do use my router sled, I'm doing a bunch of stuff at once, or it's a certain part in the project, so I can take the router apart. Only takes a few minutes, not a big deal. Right, so I took the handles off, I got this centered, but basically I cannot reuse the same holes from here, from the old one to the new one, because I'm orienting everything a little bit differently. So I got it set. I made sure I had clearance on both sides. I tried moving the sled back and forth to make sure everything is got good clearance, and it does. So now I'm just going to take a long nib marker, hold the base down, double check my clearances one more time. Yep, we're good. And just take the nib and make a dot in the center of each of those holes. All right, so now I've got my 4 holes, bada bing, bada boom, and we'll go ahead and drill those out. Okay, I got those 4 holes drilled. I'm gonna do a quick fit check. Put that back on there. Bring the screws through the bottom. There's one. All right, and like I said, I got a little bit of play here. So I'm checking my clearances. It looks like we shifted just a little bit. Nothing too bad. Moves nice and easy. All right, so we're good there. So the last thing I got to, well, 2 things I got to do here on the top yet. Got to cut a hole for the dust port. So on the dust port, I'm just going to take that long nib marker, and this one I'm not as worried about where it's placed. I want a general idea of where it's going to go. Because it is an oval shape, so as long as my hole is somewhere inside that oval, I should be all right. There's that. And then for the actual base itself, to make sure I get that hole dead center, I am actually going to measure across diagonally from one screw hole to the next, getting well, from this corner to that corner and that corner to that corner. And if they're equal distant, then I can use that to find the center of, hey, when the screw is upside down, you got to turn it the opposite direction to loosen it. But if it's equal distance diagonally between those screw holes, then I know that my center of my router bit should be somewhere in between. Set that there. And we're going to find my little tapey measure. So these are the 4 holes that I used. Right now I'm just going to get a rough estimation. So we're at about 30, oops, wrong one. Yeah, about 37 millimeters. Go this way, 37 millimeters. All right, good. So now I'm going to clear that off. Grab a quick ruler, an old angle gauge. Get to the center of the holes. Go off center just a little bit because of the nib, the size of the tip. A line across there. Good. And then the same thing here. A line across there. Good. So essentially that's going to be the center where my blade's going to be. Now, just to be sure, I grab my base and my router, measure 100 times, drill once, and going diagonal. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Get the holes here, hole there. So that goes right across the center of my router there. Double check this one too. Yep, right across the center. So kind of hard to see there with that angle, but it's going across from one screw hole to the another diagonally. Goes right across the center where the drill bit will be, and the same thing going the other direction. So just making that last confirmation before I get my hole saws out and start drilling that hole and the other hole. All right, let's get drilling. So something I want to show you real quick before I start drilling holes is just, you can search YouTube and Google or whatever search engine you use, Bing, whatever, and find this method. But this is a tried and true method for finding the center of a hole. Now this one is oval shaped, and like I said, I'm not too concerned with the center as long as it's close enough, because the opening here for this port is actually bigger than 2.5 inches. But the hose itself is only 2.5 inches. So as long as I have a 2.5 inch hole somewhere in there, I'm fine. So I'm not worried about the oval. But anyway, so one way to find the center of a circle is you find any 2 points along the edge of a circle and measure it and then draw a line across. And then make a mark in the center of that line. Then to find another line, make another line anywhere else on the circle, preferably somewhere perpendicular to that one. But known distance from one end to the other, and then make a mark in the middle, and then take a square and make a 90-degree line off of that center point, and where those 2 lines meet, you have the center of the circle. So that one I got the center. This one I've got the center just from going from the screw holes. Now for this one I'm going to do a 2.5 inch hole, and for the other hole, this here, this is my monster. It's my baby. It's a 3-inch slab flattening bit. You can see it's got the carbide blades on here that are indexed, so I can loosen the screw, turn them around when they get dull, and then I can easily get replacement blades. Because you look at some of these slab flattening bits, they have, the blades are welded directly onto the bit itself. So you have to sharpen it on there, whereas this, I can just take the blade, turn to the next index number, and then reuse it and then replace the blades when I need to, or I can take them and sharpen them. I haven't gotten that far yet. I've only gone through, I think, 1 or 2 sides of this, and these are 4-sided blades. So when I get to that point, I'll let you know. But this is a pretty meaty bit. Works amazingly. So this is 3 inches across, so I'm going to need at least a 3-inch hole. But again, allowing a little bit of wiggle room, I decided on the 3 5/8 hole saw. It still gives me enough support around the edge for the base. Gives me good purchase for the base, so I don't have to worry about it putting too much pressure. And remember, you're not, when you're using this, it's not like you're pushing down and trying to drill into the wood. You're just sliding and gliding the router across the slab. And if you have to put pressure on that sled to get it to move, then you're working too hard, and you're going to heat up that bit, and you're going to start having chips and fail points in your slab flattening. So always nice and easy. So you're not putting a lot of pressure on the sled itself. So I'm happy with that. I still have a good amount of distance between the screw holes and the hole where the bit will go. Plus it gives me a little bit more wiggle room. So if my measurements were off 1/16 of an inch in any direction, I got plenty of play. Plus it gives me a little bit of space. If I get really crazy with the cheese whiz someday and put an even bigger bit in there, I've got a little bit of room to work with. All right, so 3 5/8 on the center hole, 2.5 on the dust port hole. Let's get drilling. So I've got the holes drilled. So of course those were where our rails get hooked onto. And I've done this recently before with the hole saws, and they didn't heat up so much, but it was getting a lot of heat. So I had to keep backing off and cooling the blade, letting the acrylic cool down, and then do it again. I'm gonna have to clean this out a little bit. It's a little rough, but a lot of this stuff will pop off very easily with a chisel. But I made a cardinal mistake on this one here. So when that bit gets heated up, the last thing you want to do is stop the bit from turning. Because as soon as you stop it moving, it'll start cooling right away. And at one point, it was going and it was starting to bind up a bit, so I started to back it off. But I was like, well, in my mind, it was like, I'll just stop it and I'll pull it right out. I stopped it and it got stuck. And then you have to slowly work it back and forth, wait a little bit for the acrylic to cool, because it becomes a little bit more brittle and it'll break free. But I had to keep, trying to work it back and forth a little bit with enough pressure to kind of pry away that still warm acrylic that's in there. So I had space to pull the blade out, but not so much force that it's going to cause any kind of cracking in the acrylic itself. It is a 1/2 inch, so wasn't as worried about that, but you always be cautious. So the second hole, this is probably the biggest hole I've put into acrylic with a hole saw, being the 3 5/8. So it was binding up quite a bit. At one point, I was like, well, let me see if I spin it faster, if it'll chew through and get through quicker, which it started to, but then it started heating up and started getting the goop on the side from the melted acrylic. So I'd have to back it out, and then that melted acrylic just filled in what I just drilled out. So a little bit of a process of back and forth, you give and take sometimes, I guess. But ultimately, the holes are done. And then I put the screw holes in for the dust port. There are only a couple of things left now. One, I'm going to put a little bit of silicone. Well, first I'm going to take there's a plastic wrap on the acrylic that protects it from getting scratched. I'm going to pull that off. And then I'll put a little bit of a silicone seal on the bottom of the dust port. Not really necessary, but like with anything in my entire, I've got a shop vac, so I'm not talking about high-end vacuum systems here. but it gives a lot of suction, but I try to maximize the suction out of the thing wherever I can. So if there's a leak that I know of, I'll plug that leak up. So I'll put a little bit of silicone on it. And then the last thing is put the skirt on the platform here, which is some basic screws. So let's get peeling. All right, so here's what we got. So just drilled some holes in through the side, and then just a screw and a washer to mount the skirt on. Oh, forgot a screw right there. I was wondering why I had an extra. I'll get that in a minute. But usually about 3 screws per side, nothing major. The airflow is going to come around. It's just meant to keep the chips from just flying out all over the place. You see, it's nice and easy to move. And then have these hex nuts or hex bolts that are holding the rails, the platform onto the rails, which is great. They have a nice wide head on them, so it distributes the pressure a little bit. Don't just make them snug. Don't tighten them down too tight, because that's going to affect the motion of the rail, right? So our rail's still moving nice and easy. And then the 4 screws to hold the router base in, and then you can see, of course, the dust port here, the screws coming through. But everything looks pretty good. Other than doing that, putting one more screw over here in the corner, I think we're ready to flip this thing over and see what it looks like. All right, got it on there. So drop these pins in so I don't forget when I get crazy with the Cheese Whiz. I went ahead and put the monster bit on there because we're going to try this out in a few minutes. And this is where that larger hole in the bottom, definitely find my arrow there, arrow to arrow. The larger hole is definitely going to help. All right, because then when I'm working with it, now I can just pop this, pop the button, the release button here, slide the router all the way out with the bit on it to do my change outs. Whereas before, what was happening is I would have to actually take the sled off the rails, the entire assembly off the rails, flip it over and change out the bit when I was using that bit or any other larger bits. So that's a great thing. So I'm not going to have to do that now with having the bigger hole in the center. So I'm not going to set my depth right now because I want to get a slab underneath, but I am going to bring this up to the, you see here, bring it all the way up, set it on there. Right. Now we're going to clear off the table, get a slab on there, lock it down, and let's give this thing a whirl, baby. Okay, we're ready to go. So we got a nice mulberry cookie, clamp down onto the table, nice and firm. Get a couple sticks underneath it to keep it from rocking. We got the router in. We got our first depth set for about a little bit more than 1/16 of an inch. Gonna take it slow in our first run-ups with this. And then as irony would have it, holding my hose above the table is my first router sled. It's a couple of steel rails held together by some steel bar and screwed into some wood plates. And I used to use my palm router with that. I got some felt down the track to help it move a little bit more easily. It was interesting. It worked okay. It kind of led to some innovation, ultimately led to this, but now I use it to hang my hose well above the table. And I got this little elbow here. It just keeps a little bit rigid by the actual router itself. So last thing I got to do is plug in the router, and then we're going to let her rip and show you how this thing works. And, you know, take off the first layer and try and flatten out this slab of mulberry. So without any further ado, let's get milling. All right, let's see what the result looks like. So of course, part of the work is the bit. The other part is the sled, but man, nice and flat. Yeah, a little bit of lines, but with a bigger bit. Does help with, you know, avoiding those channels too deeply. A little quick sanding will take that right off. It's not picking up as much of the debris as I would have hoped. It definitely is helping. So definitely on in one sway of the motion, it's picking up a lot of wood chips. When I come back the other way, it's not. Could just be the fact that it's on the other side of the dust port, or the other side of the sled. So not picking up as much, but what it is doing is, with the other one, fortunately I don't have any video of doing it, it was just flinging dust everywhere, or debris everywhere. So this is a little bit more controlled. I did have to turn on the blower on the ceiling to kind of filter out some of the dust, but not as much as I normally would have. The other thing that's improved, using this softer skirt, usually by now with doing that much milling off the top of a slab, this thing would be thick and caked with all kinds of chips and stuff, and it'd just be like bulges everywhere where the chips just could not break free. But, you know, using this lighter weave and this thinner hair works wonders, because you can see all the way around. It just doesn't, it has little pieces, but no clumps of chips. So all in all, I'm very happy with it. Obviously, like with anything that we do in this shop, there are 101 ways to do it. If you got ideas in that dust port to make it more effective, let me know. I'd love to hear your ideas. If you got thoughts, questions, anything, drop us a comment. We try to respond to as many as we can. So far, we've been able to keep up with all of them. Mostly because we don't get a ton of comments, but that's okay. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. Leave a comment. No. But yeah, leave a comment, ask a question, visit our website, drop a comment there, or use the contact us form, ask more questions. We do not have any plans for this. This was just kind of figure it out as we go, had an idea in my head and bought the parts and kind of made it work. So we don't have any plans for it, but a lot of great places that do. So we might want to give those a look-see. And I'll try to do the research and look in the description. If I had time to do the research and see what all these parts cost now, You get an idea of what the total package would cost you to build it, including the acrylic, and maybe some of the bolts and special screws, because I did use stainless and I did buy parts to be able to mount everything together. It does come with parts, but I bought some additional ones just to kind of fit in my design. Right. Yeah, so hopefully this helped you. Hopefully it demystified it and encourages you to build your own, because this has become a very useful tool in my shop. And I've got a backlog of slabs and things that need to be flattened. So guess what I'm going to be doing for the next couple of days. So as always, let's take a quick moment and close it out in some prayer. Heavenly Father, once again, we come before you. You have given us so much. You have provided all these resources that we get to use, provided us with the opportunities to make things, and kind of wired us to kind of think things through and come up with ideas, and give us the courage to try them out. Father, we just passed the Easter holiday. We thank you for the blessing of our Lord and Savior through his sacrifice on Good Friday and his resurrection on Sunday. We don't die for our sins. He has made the ultimate sacrifice and taken the ultimate penalty for our sins. And for that, we could never be thankful enough. And Father, thank you. Thank you for these viewers. Thank you for our platform. Thank you for the things we get to build that go to help other people, not just with giving them a product they can enjoy, but with the funds that you provide to reinvest in the shop and to, most importantly, to do your work to help children and help families around the world. And we pray this in Jesus' loving name. Amen. All right, we've got a backlog of video footage. Work has been yes, I do have a day job. Work has been exceptionally busy the last few months, so I haven't gotten to a lot of the editing from over the holiday season. So we'll be digging through a lot of that. Got a laundry list of projects. Yep. So our parts table, we're putting all the pieces and parts that we're using. We got a bunch of blocks and everything else standing by for their debut into the woodworking world. But first, we got a bunch of slabs and some other things we want to build and put into our store here in Noblesville, Indiana. So stay tuned. We got more coming. Always lots of great shorts, some shorter videos and that we will be throwing out there over the weeks to come. And we hope it helps. And as always, leave us a comment. You got ideas? We'd love to share ours, share yours, and then we'll see what we can make of it. All right, in that, take care. God bless. Okay, so I'm going to level with you. What you didn't see there was not a hugely expensive, but a mistake that's going to cost some money. So what you do see here is the sled base, all mounted, everything working well. Even got a dust port all rigged up to bring dust in from the router and from the body here. But what you don't see is this piece here. So this is the piece I started off with. This is the piece that I was originally doing the cuts and everything and had pieces mounted. And I cut this part out because made a big mistake. So as you can see, everything lines up here going this way. But originally the design was supposed to go this way. But when I put the old piece on the old template on top of the new piece, I didn't have my orientation right. So what happened was I had the orientation for this, which meant my dust port was in the wrong place. I had all this excess over here, which I could cut off, no big deal. But with the dust port being over here, that limited my movement, my lateral movement to the left side. So after much deliberation on different ways, I was like, well, do I drill new holes? Do I do this? Do I do that? And in the end, I decided, you know what? I'm going to bite the bullet. I had another 12 by 12 piece. I would have liked something a little bit bigger to have a handle back here to be able to control the sled that way versus having my hands on the rails. But again, you're not putting pressure on it, so it's no big deal. It's just a little bit more comfortable to have a handle back here. The reason I'm adding this clip is that level of humility, right? This is a a learning channel. All the videos I make aren't me being an expert. I am not an expert. As Tony Robbins would say, I'm not your guru. Uh, but I post videos as I'm learning, as I'm going through and trying things, breaking things, stuff I've never done before. It's kind of taking you along for the journey. So, in complete transparency, there was a big fail. It's going to cost about, my British friends would say, 40 quid, 50 quid for that piece of acrylic that I had to waste. Again, some of it was salvageable, but we'll see what I can do with it in the future. But just showing that all best intentions, thinking things through, planning, measuring. Um, in this case, it was just the orientation was wrong. All the holes lined up perfectly. Everything was great. I just had my orientation wrong. So don't despair. Sometimes mistakes will cost you a few bucks, but that is part of the process. And I always hear that the difference between a novice and a master craftsman is the master craftsmen know how to hide their mistakes. So, but I'm putting it right out there for you because it's part of the learning process.